Hello, hello, and you are so close. It's Des Jardins. Des Jardins, with like this fun French accent. So hi everyone. It's really great to see some familiar faces, and a little ironic that I finally get to speak at the ANA when I no longer have a influencer marketing campaign to sell you anymore. I wanted to speak a little bit today about myself and what I've been up to. I, as was mentioned, had co-founded a company called BlogHer in 2005. And at the time, it was a pioneering company that opened the door to what we now call influencer marketing, which is not what we called it at the time. As a co-founder, I got to evangelize to the brands on the marketing side just how exciting influencer marketing was. At the time, it was seen as the Wild West. We needed to open it, create a business model around it, and we did that, and it had scaled. And it was an awful lot of fun. In the 10 years that we grew BlogHer to about 100 million monthly uniques, with some of the biggest bloggers and social influencers, later tweeters, Instagrammers, pinners, some of the largest in the world in our network, we realized that we had the next step. And my life had changed from evangelizing influencers to very different things. The last 5 years of the company, very different story. We were experiencing a lot of interesting stuff that in many ways you are familiar with. One was shifts in the ad market. BlogHer, because we needed to scale influence, was supported through advertising revenue, and it still is. However, there's been a lot of shifts in that market. And in the last 5 years of running the company, I had to speak about something very different. Things like viewability and ad blocking, and also try to explain this to 20,000 bloggers who are trying to understand why their revenues were going down. Also, we had the F word, Facebook. Now, I used to sit in conferences with people from Facebook thinking, like, good luck with your little platform. And then pretty quickly we realized that they were disintermediating pretty much everyone in the publishing space. And if you did not have a Facebook strategy or knew how you were going to work with Facebook down the line, you were simply done. So when we were acquired in 2014, I spent another year with the company that acquired us, She Knows Media, and I did a lot of deals with ad tech. And I looked into a lot of new technologies trying to answer the question, what's next? Additionally, when I left the company, I was approached by many companies wanting to reach mom bloggers and asking for the coveted list of influencers, and would I kindly reach out to them on their behalf, which I thought was rather funny for two reasons. One, there is a list. We do have a database. I've never asked bloggers to do anything in 10 years of monetizing blogs for bloggers. The other thing is that the whole space had evolved so much that it didn't even work that way anymore. So I started writing a lot about this. And that was when the ANA had reached out and said, hey, do you want to talk a little bit more about influencer marketing? And I said, absolutely, but I have to talk about all the other technology that I've been dating lately. So I developed a big crush on VR and a few other technologies. I went back to San Francisco, where I was based. I was in New York quite a bit when I was with BlogHer. And I started to explore new technologies, trying to figure out what is the next thing in marketing. Not just in the influencer space, but in technology, period. And I learned a lot. For one thing, influence has changed a lot. It's become much more programmatic. I wanted to go back on my slide. It's okay. So let me first touch on each of these different areas, some of which you know about and have, thank you, and have done, and others which you may not have yet. So we'll start with influencer marketing. I figured the best way to approach how influence has changed is by looking at what it was, which you probably are very familiar with, but haven't really realized what the shifts look like until you look at how it has evolved. So yesterday, and I'm thinking circa 2006, 7, 8, 9, this is what influence looked like. It was initially a PR function, meaning the first deals that I did were with PR agencies. This was great because bloggers were largely a word-of-mouth function, but it didn't scale. Earned media was the holy grail to any marketer that was approaching a blogger, or later a Facebook or a tweeter. And that was great too, only you couldn't really quantify it or guarantee it. So in essence, you were throwing a lot of money for a very specific result that could not be guaranteed. And we wouldn't guarantee that because, as we all know, the FTC guidelines do not allow payment for endorsement without disclosure. And if you're looking for earned media or unpaid, of course, you can't really pay for that. Additionally, size was what mattered the most. Brands came to me saying, we want the biggest bloggers. And we said, but there's a lot of other bloggers here, and they're really good, and they're really influential. And the emphasis was always on getting to the biggest ones, and sure, maybe we'll address the long tail in the process. And finally, for the content creators, blogs were it. Everything that we did in terms of Facebook, Twitter, later Pinterest and Instagram were all in support of our blogs. Why? Because we were getting paid high CPM dollars for our blogs. Everything was about driving traffic to the blog. This image, I think, best encapsulates how I envision influence working in 2009. This is a picture from the Blogger Conference, which was the largest in our industry. And every year, McDonald's came and sponsored this party that we lovingly called Cheeseburger. And we didn't force them to wear the bags. That came later. But basically, it was about showing influential bloggers, in this case, mom bloggers, a great time, and trending on Twitter as a result. I can't say that McDonald's sold more cheeseburgers as a result of this campaign, but this was a very typical influencer campaign, circa 2009. So where are we now? Well, influencers pretty much are part of every brand's marketing campaign. We know that. It shouldn't be all of it, by the way, but it is a critical component. It's not the dollars, the experimental dollars that it was back in 2008, 2009. Programmatic has affected everything, not just advertising, but influence. You've seen a proliferation of platforms that now make influence programmatic. And we can actually back it into some guaranteed outcomes because we've done so many campaigns that we kind of can tell you, this is what you'll see. And we actually started to charge based on the earned media outcomes because we knew what those outcomes were going to be. This is a picture of Cecily Kellogg, who was a big mom blogger and a perfect example of how things have shifted over time. When I saw her at the Blogger Conference a few years ago, I apologized profusely because I hadn't been on her blog, and she said, actually, I don't blog anymore, I'm on Medium, which is pretty much what most influencers will say to you today. Some may still have blogs. The ones that were monetizing their blogs still are, but they're making less off of that. They're monetizing their influence across platform and using every tool at their disposal to drive traffic out, no longer to the blogs, because people aren't going there anymore, and for other reasons that I'll get into right now. Ad tech. It's been very effective for any brand who really wants to be relevant and have a data-driven decision behind all of their media. And it actually was really helpful for a lot of the long-tail bloggers in our network who weren't making money off of their high volume of traffic, but may have had great readership and very relevant readers to a brand. So that was a plus. However, it also, what's the technical term? Gunked up the works, made it really difficult for any reader to get through, and it irritated a lot of people. I can tell you that after we were acquired and we joined She Knows Media, we did an audit because we just had this amalgam of sites. And I had done dozens of these ad tech deals. Why? Because the ad revenues weren't really affecting us the way that they were, positively that is. And we did an audit to see what the ad load was on our ads, and it was taking, in some cases, 7, 8, 9, 10 seconds for ads to show up. And a lot of that was because brands wanted those scripts in there so they could get the data. So even though we could get the data, we didn't necessarily benefit from that ability. And users were opting out across the board, not just our site. In fact, we were not that affected. But sites with male, millennial users, they had up to 40% attrition due to ad blocking. So that led me to wonder when I left Blogger, where is the opportunity now? How are brands playing? How can they play? And it would be an obvious answer to look at mobile. Mary Meeker, in her yearly Internet Trends report, said of all the forms of media that are out there right now, mobile is the only one where the ad saturation has not yet met the demand in terms of the consumption. So we know that there's still a lot of open space in mobile, but it's kind of ours to screw up. Right now, the open space, SMS and bots, makes sense because of the proliferation of mobile. But we have to be really careful about how we're using that space because the consumer has become really sensitive to how we do it. So rather than stickers and some of these other things I think are great, but kind of fun, we should be thinking about the functionality of mobile and why are people using it. I had a great conversation with a friend of mine who works at IBM in the Watson Group, and he has been personally pursuing projects digging into the technology behind SMS. And he partnered with some students at Berkeley to figure out how they could enable illiterate people in rural areas of India through mobile. Because although there are high levels of illiterate people in the rural areas, everyone has a mobile phone there. And he gave me a little video of his project. By the way, he is looking for partners on this. It's not a branded thing. Cut it short because I knew we didn't have a ton of time, but this is a great way of providing functionality, doing good. I know we've been talking about how to do good while still hitting the numbers. What a great way to do it, and to still get the data from your users that you need to keep doing what you're doing. I want to talk a bit about VR and AR and MR, virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality. So I asked a friend of mine who is a thought leader in this space where he thought we were at in this area. And he made I love the quote, "We're at Pong," which makes a lot of sense because has anyone here yet been well, not cinematic VR, but in a social VR setting yet? Okay, one, that's great. Two with me. So I wanted to check this out, so I started a show in virtual reality called The Virtual Unknown, a show for those who want to love VR. And the idea was because I'm like you, I suspect that there's a big open territory that we can explore in this area, but very few people are still actively using social and they don't have the hardware. It's really hard to set up. It's still, there's a lot of friction, and we don't know which players in terms of hardware are going to emerge in the space and really own it. So I started this. That, by the way, is Ryan Bell that I'm interviewing there. And there's a lot of things that are still really awkward about it. People, for instance, would transport in front of me, and we still haven't figured out the editorial standards and the creative standards, so people stop throwing up, among other things. In fact, the very first cases of sexual harassment have started, just as we had cases of abuse with social, before really strong moderating tools were there. So you're wondering, why am I so in love with VR? Well, I'll tell you. I think that ultimately it's going to create new spaces for us. New spaces that once we remove that friction are going to enable things we haven't been able to do before. We know that AR is another thing that is probably a little more prominent than VR at this point, just because it's enabled by our phones. And right now, the key use of it is in Snapchat, altering how we look. But this is where a lot of the futurists feel we are going to see a lot more opportunity. Why? Because it's enabled through our mobile phones. People have access to it. We're untethered and can use AR in our everyday lives. Now, MR, in case you haven't heard of that yet, is the next step. It's a combination of VR and AR. This is a company that I work with called Practical VR. Even though they're called Practical VR, they're MR, but since a lot of people don't yet get MR, they're called Practical VR. They did a great illustration of what MR will provide us in the future, an ability to alter our current environment. This might sound a little Minority Report to you, and if it does, get used to it. There's a great quote from Shell Israel, who is partnered with the futurist Robert Scoble, and they have now started a consultancy called the Transformation Group, who is basically trying to further the practice of mixed reality. Now, they estimate that AR will happen before MR, and we'll start to see these applications coming out. But they still feel really strongly about it, and they think that MR will take over everything. As Shell says, MR is the next generation of AR. So armed with some of this new stuff, what do I predict will be the future? For those who are looking to connect with influencers, consider marketplaces. And by marketplaces, I don't mean eBay, although it's a great marketplace. I mean category-specific places where there are two distinct communities providing services and exchange. Here's an example of one. This is called StyleBee, and StyleBee is an on-demand marketplace. You could get everything from a blowout before work to, they've actually serviced the wives of the Super Bowl players this year in the Skybox. It's on-demand beauty service, whether it's any kind of beauty service. They've already started doing deals with brands. Why? Not because their stylists are digital media influencers, but they get in front of people every single day. Wouldn't you like them using your product and getting it out into the world? Another marketplace that I've worked with most recently is called MoveWith. Now, MoveWith is a marketplace for fitness professionals. It basically helps them to professionalize, since they really do work in a relatively isolated environment. And they have their classes, but they're not monetizing outside of those classes. Here they can create audio classes that are sold via subscription and monetize their courses and their content. Again, you want to get in front of high-intensity instructors or yoga instructors in this particular location. This is a place where you can find them. And increasingly, these marketplaces are also looking to work with brands and looking to work with brands that want to reach very specific communities in a meaningful way. Regarding the ad tech issue, I personally feel that blockchain will make a big difference. Now, before you fall asleep, let me explain what I mean. Blockchain, for those who may not be as familiar with it, is an emerging technology that's being applied across all industries. We have got an interesting situation now where there are people who don't want to see ads, even when they're good ads. We already mistrust ads. So here's how blockchain would work. Anyone here have a Safeway card? I'm going to use a relatively analog. Okay, great. Me and one other person. So the way that Safeway cards work, right? You use your Safeway card and you get deals. What do? They get your data. And they know where you shop, they know what you like, they know that you bought 3 of one thing and 1 of another, and that's the exchange. Media is making this kind of a deal with their audiences all the time now. Look at Hulu. You can have a paid version of Hulu, for which you get no ads, or a free version of Hulu, for which you get ads every 2 seconds. It's your choice. And the way that we've been able to navigate this is that by providing choice, you are bought in to ads or not ads. Now, blockchain would enable publishers and enable brands to compensate people for their time and attention. So the company I mentioned earlier, Practical VR, they provide cryptocurrency payments for people who are providing their data so that they can better map things in virtual reality. That's a little complicated. But on the ad side, there are groups like AdChain, which is DMA backed, which are looking into how blockchain and these exchanges would work. So here's a very real example. A company called Brave Browser, they just had their initial coin offering of about 30 million in their first round. It's a little crazy how these ICOs are working these days. What they do is offer what we call a basic attention token, BAT, so that a user is paid for their attention. Basically, that's how it works. Then they pay the publisher in BAT. Now, some people think this is crazy. Who wants to get paid in BAT? I assure you, this is becoming more and more common across multiple industries. And you know this by looking at how Ethernet, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency usage is going up. And if you are serving a male millennial audience, I say you have to check this out. It may not happen tomorrow, but eventually you will be having this sort of deal with your audience, where you either compensate them for their time, their data, or information. So SMS, I think that, again, we're looking at real estate. There's only so much of it to have, and we'll only be able to use it until the consumer says no. So it's an open field for now, but we have to be really careful about how we use it. And if we're using bots to help enable the SMS, we have to be really clear that it's not going to happen overnight. Really good AI. Who here uses a virtual assistant? Has anyone, well, you may not even know. Okay, Doug, is that you? Okay, so Doug does. Now, if you, do you have Amy? Okay, so some of you may not even know. If you're wondering who is this new person named Amy in your address book, it's probably the bot Amy. I thought I was having a conversation with my friend's assistant for about 2 weeks until I realized I was talking to a bot. This is the first application of bots, and this is something that advertisers are using en masse for customer service. But as we start to have these more complicated applications of AI to bots, you have to be really careful about how it's working and know that deep learning takes time. So it's going to be kludgy, klutzy, just like every other form of new ad tech before it really starts to work. I had a conversation with a friend who runs a company called Handstack. They do SMS text campaigns, and I said, look, you get your data via third-party, approved third-party sources, which is great, but it ends up being telecoms. And it also means that many of their users have given their data and don't know it. So they know they have to be careful. And I said, how do you actually succeed in these campaigns, knowing that you're pushing stuff out to people who don't necessarily want the information? And she showed me an example of this campaign, which she said was super successful. And there's several reasons why this campaign was really successful. One, there were so many data slices. It wasn't about volume here, it was about relevance. So they got people who were not only of the right data and psychographic set, they also geo-targeted this campaign, and they did it in a very specific time frame. So literally, if you were in the vicinity of the theater where this particular movie was going to be premiered that day, you may have received this, this text. Now, clearly, the person who responded got the joke. That's the kind of precision that needs to happen with SMS. It's going to be a great customer service method, but I don't think it's going to be a branding opportunity. We brought up fake news. I think AI will be the antidote to fake news. Just like deep learning is helping us get better with bots, it'll help us weed out fake news. And we see this already happening. Google is already starting to weed out really bad abusive comments for the New York Times. Facebook has been applying it to terrorist-related posts. Same thing will happen with fake news, and it's going to be human inputs that over time help them to get smarter. In terms of VR, I think it's still too early for us to enjoy social VR. Like I said, the hardware is too much, it's really difficult to have the right system, it's a really heavy RAM load. I've been involved with companies that are actually doing this for a living, and there's things that go wrong even there. So where are we going to get a taste for this? I think it'll be out-of-home experiences. So out-of-home cinematic VR is going to be how we start to get our VR addiction. And then once the hardware wars are settled and it's not so expensive to buy this stuff and the technology is a little bit better, we will start buying this stuff en masse. Here's an example of an out-of-home VR experience. This is a company called Nomadic VR up in San Rafael. I did this simulation. By the way, this was in a 10 by 10 foot room, all white. I put on the gear, went through, and was transported. I could not walk across that plank because they use real items to help simulate. And the VR was so good, I mean, even though I knew I would not fall to my death, I could not walk that plank. I also was transported up in an elevator without moving. And it felt like I was literally being transported to the 10th floor in the top of that building. Another company, Exit Reality, is using pop-up virtual reality to help develop habits. This is a pop-up unit at a hotel in San Francisco. So while we're having our social experiences in real life, we can experience virtual life. AR, MR, I think, will be the runaways for sure. And they will be ubiquitous as mobile because they are mobile enabled now. So Practical gave me some great visuals here. So if you're wearing a MR enabled device, right now the HoloLens, it almost looks like a space helmet, but eventually it could be in your glasses, it could be in your bike helmet, can help you gamify the world. Now again, that might sound too Minority Report to you, and it may be. It's ours to screw up, or it could be a really fantastic experience. This is something that we're gonna have to grapple with as an industry as we start to utilize this technology. So Shell also had a great quote here that smart glasses will be just like having a mobile phone. We'll have these with us all the time, which will make our ability to use AR and MR a constant. So that's it for that. Thank you.